Beethoven was born 250 years ago in Germany, but for hundreds of millions of Chinese, he was reborn in 1977, when his music, and classical music in general, was reintroduced after the Cultural Revolution. The person responsible for that was Li Delun, who also founded what is now known as the China National Symphony Orchestra. I spoke to his grandchildren in Toronto. Rosie and Kemen, thanks very much for joining us here on the China Current. Your grandfather, Li Delun, was a giant in classical music in China and also around the world. But before we get to that, what was he like just as grandpa? What was it like growing up with him?
It's funny that you should mention giant because that's how I felt. He was a very big man, especially when you were a little kid. And it's bigger than everybody else in the family. He's fat, you know. He takes a big chair when he sits down. And he's very calm and very funny and silly at times. He likes to tell jokes at the dinner table. He knows a lot of really funny stories about bad poetry, which is great. And like ancient Chinese jokes, I think probably like jokes about, not about music at all. Like he just likes to joke around about everything.
China was a very poor country for much of your grandfather's life, and certainly in the late 1940s, classical music was foreign, literally foreign to Chinese ears. Yet after the Second World War, your grandfather founded what was the very first professional orchestra in the country. How did that happen?
He was working as a revolutionary. He was an underground revolutionary. He was studying in Shanghai Conservatory at the time. And for whatever reason, he actually became a fugitive. He was on the run. And it was advised to him by his colleagues and friends, especially Mr. Zhou Enlai, who later became the first premier of China in 1949, that he needed to get out of town right away. And he didn't have any options. He had to choose between a plane that went to Hong Kong that day or to Yan'an, and he said, "Of course, I will go to Yan'an." And so he got onto a plane from Nanjing, I believe. So there was an arrangement made. He went to Nanjing, boarded a plane on which there was a shipment of instruments, and he brought this to Yan'an to teach music to the people that were already stationed there, who were soldiers. So when he arrived, he had all these clarinets and violins, and these soldiers like, what is that? Like, what are these sticks with holes? Like, what? He said, oh yeah, you put this together and you blow. And he had to teach from scratch. So he taught most of the wind instruments. He knows a little bit of everything, and cello. And then when my grandmother went to join him, my grandmother became the violin teacher and taught the string section, and he did the wind, and he put it together basically a little by little. But because people were enthusiastic and it was such a new thing, and music is always good, right? Like when there's no music, all of a sudden somebody brings it in, everybody wants to be a part of it.
Rosie, I want to ask you about a later part of history, 1979, when the United States and China restarted their diplomatic relationship. That year also, your grandfather received Isaac Stern, the great American violinist. Was that a coincidence of timing?
I definitely think, in a way, it was a coincidence, but it was definitely correlated. I think if it weren't for the fact that things were already kind of in motion for the bridge to be built, then this opportunity probably wouldn't have flourished the way it did.
Yeah, definitely. Both sides were in the mindset to start dialogue. And what better way to start it than to play some music together?
And when politicians meet, you know, they make politics, but when musicians meet, they make music, and you know, part of the music that they make might include conflict, but it's part of the beauty of it.
That historic meeting and the friendship they then grew for the rest of their lives is documented in the film From Mao to Mozart, which won the Oscar for Best Documentary. What do you think was so appealing about that film to global audiences?
Not just to global audience. I was in China. When I watched the movie, it showed me parts of China that I've never seen.
I think during that time there must have been so much curiosity to the Far East, because I mean, there was no internet and travel was very hard and not as commonplace as it is now. And so when this documentary came out, I imagine that people were like, hey, we get a little glimpse of what it's like. And it was a focus on what we shared rather than the differences, because Western music, it's not foreign to them, but in a way we were sharing it in this activity together.
I am James Chau. You're watching The China Current. Follow us on social media at The China Current.